So my name is Julie McLaughlin. I'm the Stewardship and Outreach Manager for Southeast Michigan Land Conservancy, or SMLC. SMLC is a nonprofit land conservancy that's been operating in the 7-county Southeast Michigan region since 1988. Our mission is to conserve natural lands and open space, including forests, wetlands, meadows, agricultural lands, and places of scenic beauty, to provide habitat for wildlife and to enrich the lives of people. We currently own and manage 18 nature preserves, including the new Seacrest Nature Preserve in Superior Township, which we hope will open to the public in 2021. All of our nature preserves are open from dawn until dusk, 365 days a year, for passive recreation such as hiking, birdwatching, and photography. We also permanently protect private lands through conservation easements. Altogether, SMLC has protected over 3,400 acres of land. If you aren't familiar with how big an acre is, it's slightly less than the size of a football field. So as you can imagine, this is quite a bit of land we've protected in a developed and rapidly developing region like Southeast Michigan. This map shows where these protected lands are located. Many of our nature preserves are located in our 3 conservation priority areas. These are the Superior Greenway in Superior Township in Washtenaw County, the Sibley Prairie in Wayne County, and Lost Lake in Oakland and Genesee counties, which is where we'll be visiting today. This is a map of Lost Lake Nature Preserve. It was acquired in 2013 due to a generous donor who provided funds for the $1.1 million purchase price. The preserve opened to the public in 2015, and at 538 acres, it is our largest preserve. It's also permanently protected under a conservation easement held by Six Rivers Land Conservancy. The northern 185 acres are actually located in Grand Blanc Township in Genesee County, with the rest in Holly Township in Oakland County. The preserve protects most of the 52-acre Slack Lake and the surrounding wetland complex, including the smaller Bloat Lake. There is public parking lot and a trailhead on Evans Road, just east of Holly Road. This map also illustrates the variety of habitats found at the nature preserve. The landscape here is a mosaic of forests, which you can see in the dark green areas, lakes, which you can see the reflection of open water with the rings around them, and wetlands, which are the lighter green areas, primarily around the lakes, and basically divide the preserve in half. So the pre-European settlement habitat was oak hickory forest, mixed conifer swamp, and the lakes. How do we know this? Well, between 1816 and 1856, Michigan was systematically surveyed by the General Land Office, which had been established by the federal government in 1785. The detailed notes taken by the land surveyors have proven to be a useful source of information on Michigan's landscape as it appeared prior to widespread European settlement. Surveyors took detailed notes on the location, species, and diameter of each tree used to mark section lines and corners. They commented on the locations of rivers, lakes, wetlands, the agricultural potential of soils, and the general quality of timber along each section line as they were measured out. In the 1990s, biologists from the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, or MNFI, developed a method to translate the notes of the GLO surveys into digital maps showing historic habitat. And that can be used by researchers, land managers, and the general public to give us an idea of what the historic vegetation was. Lost Lake Nature Preserve was established as a beautiful place that preserves the natural heritage of Oakland and Genesee counties. It demonstrates the value of diverse, high quality, and locally important wildlife habitat. It provides a peaceful and scenic setting in which visitors can interact with and enjoy nature. and it offers opportunities to learn more about the preserve's natural communities and what influences their success. Because it is such a large preserve and much of it is inaccessible to people, we've captured quite a bit of drone footage. One of our incredible volunteers is a registered drone pilot and also a fantastic photographer. This has allowed us to see areas that we could not have found on foot or even by boat, and also to give us an idea of the types and sizes of the different natural features of the habitat. In the background, you see Slack Lake on the left and Bloat Lake coming up on your right. The preserve contains an abundance of streams, ponds, and wetlands, and Slack Lake is one of the largest remaining undeveloped natural freshwater lakes in the area. The preservation of this property is extremely important as wetlands are crucial to improving water quality and to control flooding. Protection of the property in its natural condition helps to ensure the quality and quantity of water resources in the Flint watershed. If you're visiting the preserve for the first time, you'll head east onto Evans Road from Holly Road. Evans Road is a long dirt road and the parking lot is almost at the very end on the left side of the road. So we have signs up along the way to tell you you're going to the right place. The trail we'll be taking you on is approximately 2 miles round trip. At the kiosk, you'll find SMLC news and events, preserve rules, and a trail map. Along the trail, you'll find markers to keep you on course. And joining us on this hike is my dog, Steven. Dogs are allowed at SMLC nature preserves, but must be on a leash, and please pick up after your pets. While hiking at one of our preserves, we encourage you to follow some basic leave no trace principles. These include plan ahead and prepare, travel on durable surfaces, meaning stay on the trail, dispose of waste properly, also known as pack it in, pack it out, leave what you find, respect wildlife, and be considerate of other visitors. This last one has become really important recently as we've seen an increase in trail users during the pandemic, but we also need to social distance if we want to keep everyone safe. So please keep that in mind when planning your visit. Try and stay 6 feet apart from other visitors and do not visit if you are sick. On our hike today, we will stop at 5 featured points shown on the map. The first will be the Young Forest. Then we will go to the Prairie and Wetland Restoration Project. We'll head to the Lake Overlook next. We'll visit the Mature Forest, and finally, we will explore the wetland complex. Stop number 1 is along a section of trail which goes about a mile through a young forest. We know this is a young forest both by looking at the size and the types of trees here, but also by looking at the historical records that we talked about earlier. If we look back at our pre-settlement map, this area was once likely part of a vast oak hickory or dry music southern forest, which is shown in green on the map. However, we can see in these aerial photos taken by airplanes that the site looked very different by the time the photo was taken in 1956. Most of the area that was historically oak hickory forest was converted to agriculture at some time in the early to mid 1900s. And this is likely after being logged during the 1800s. If we look at a photo shortly after this, in 1967, we can see that some trees have already begun filling in where previously were row crops. And this is likely from both being planted and then just naturally regrowing. So this is again the 1967 photo compared with a recent satellite image. And it becomes very obvious that the trees in these wooded areas have filled in quickly. Most of them are less than 50 years old. There's a couple of areas that have mature trees, which you can see as dark spots on the map. We can actually then use these historic photos to plan a site visit where we go out, locate, and photograph what are called old growth trees. And I also like this newer aerial photo because Slack Lake looks like a little ghost. Some of the young trees found here include red and silver maple, green ash, cottonwood, aspen, cherry, oak, and elm. However, like many of these types of forests in Michigan, a large portion of the trees and shrubs here are invasive species, such as buckthorn, multiflora rose, and autumn olive. And these all grow very quickly and shade out understory vegetation. In addition to the ecological impacts of invasive species, keeping the trail free from these is something we have to manage every season. And as the volunteer coordinator, I am always looking for help with managing both the trails and the invasive species. So I'll give a little plug for anyone living in the area to get in touch with me and see how you can help. Despite these areas of invasive species, the forests on this property are prime habitat for wildlife, such as amphibians, woodpeckers, waterfowl, and other woodland birds. Our next stop will be to look at the restoration project, which actually occurred in two different areas. One is a wetland and the other is a prairie. So one part of the wetland, or one part of the restoration project was to enhance 9 acres of wetland, and the other was to establish 15 acres of prairie. These were made possible in a partnership with Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. First, we will look at the wetland restoration. So SMOC are not experts in wetland restoration and construction, and this project required a lot of engineering and heavy equipment operation, which is why we're grateful to work with partners such as Ducks Unlimited and the Fish and Wildlife Service, who have a lot of experience with this process. The basic idea is that we currently have a wetland, shown here in blue, that is being drained by a ditch, shown by the blue dashed arrow. And in order to keep water in the wetland, what we did is plugged the ditch with nearby dirt and then built a spillway out of rocks and installed a water control structure. This shows the excavator removing dirt from a nearby borrow pit, which is the material that will be used to plug the ditch. And this shows the stone material, which is used for the spillway. So this just shows the large amount of stone needed for this spillway. This is a look at the inside of the water control structure. The pipes in the background go all the way through the drain plug and spillway, and that lets us open or close the opening to increase or decrease the amount of water in the wetland, depending on the time of year and the amount of rainfall that we're getting. And this shows the final layout of the stone spillway with the water control structure installed, as well as the berm created by the construction of the ditch plug and the spillway, which was then covered with dirt and planted with clover. And this is a look at the finished wetland restoration. So with the major construction completed in February of 2018, our ongoing maintenance is fairly simple. We visit the berm in the spring and summer to check on wetland water levels. We adjust them if needed and make sure that no trees are growing on the berm, as large tree roots could cause the plug to fail, kind of like a break in a dam. We also make sure that there are not muskrat dens near any of the infrastructure. The other part of this restoration project is the prairie, which covers the entire X-shaped area you can see here on the map. This is the site of a prairie restoration that was begun in 2018, and we wrapped up the major restoration phase this past summer. This last stage concluded with the seeding of native wildflowers and grasses in the Prairie Runway, and this is also a culmination of the grant-funded partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, and the DNR. The original 15-acre Prairie Runway was likely a mix of planted native grasses and remnant grasses and wildflowers. You can see here that before restoration even began, we had a nice open area to work with. The runway has a large amount of big bluestem, which is the gold and red grass in the photo, and some other native prairie species. But it also contains a large number of invasive shrubs and small trees, primarily autumn olive, which is the tree with the silvery leaves. This drone footage taken before restoration began shows the large amount of invasive shrubs, such as buckthorn, autumn olive, honeysuckle, and multiflora rose. It's great to capture this winter footage because our target species are visible while everything else is dormant. You can see there's a lot of material that is in this Prairie Runway at the beginning. So SMLC's goal for restoration is to return this area to prairie or savanna habitat to benefit grassland songbirds, which are in decline. Before European settlement, southern Michigan grasslands were largely dry prairies, oak savannas, and wet meadows. But during the settlement of Michigan, these open prairies disappeared quickly as they were converted to farmland due to their rich soils. Wet meadows were drained and also made into agricultural lands. Michigan once had 70,000 acres of upland prairies and 350,000 acres of wet prairies. Today, this has been reduced to fewer than 2,000 acres or less than 1%. Over the past 25 years, grassland bird populations have declined in North America more than any other group of birds. Even 15 acres of prairie can provide habitat for species such as eastern meadowlark, song sparrow, and dickcissel. The first step in this large-scale project was to mechanically remove the small trees and shrubs using heavy machinery like the grinder pictured here. Again, winter is a great time to remove shrubs and trees because all of the grasses and flowers have gone dormant and the leaves have fallen off the trees. This video shows the large equipment required to remove trees at this scale. And this photo was taken during the tree grinding. You can see in the left-hand side where the grinder has gone through and removed the trees versus the top section where removal has not been done yet. And it also gives you a scale of just how big this project is when the grinder looks really tiny down there. So here's more drone imagery. It's been a really efficient way to visualize the progress of this restoration and also to share the story with supporters like you all. This flyover shows the regrowth of grasses and flowers during the first growing season. And If you can't tell, there are a fair amount of weeds, so this is not the finished product. We'll talk about what else we need to do over the next couple years. And here is another good shot that shows basically how we successfully removed all of those shrubs and trees from the prairie runway. So after the major heavy equipment work was finished, we came back and held stewardship work days with the help of volunteers. This photo was actually taken on my first day of work in July 2018. Here, stewardship volunteers Jacob and Doug are using herbicide wands to do a treatment of resprouts of honeysuckle, which is one of the invasive shrubs. This is a relatively low-tech method that ensures that the initial large effort is going to be effective in the long run. After a second treatment of mowing and herbicide in 2019, you can see that it's not the most attractive looking site. However, this is a really important part of the restoration process because it ensures that the area will be prepared when we plant seeds of native species, and all of the weeds just won't come back and outcompete whatever we put on the site. And so by the third growing season, you can see that the additional mowing and herbicide have helped remove those annual weeds. The native vegetation has begun to fill back in, but the trees have not returned. And this is what the area looked like this past summer after the seeding with native plants. This shows some species like verbenas, swamp milkweed, common milkweed, and other native species that are going to set the stage for this prairie. During this initial restoration phase, we saw some great indicators of the type of prairie habitat we're trying to establish. This is a monarch caterpillar on common milkweed, another species of milkweed called butterfly weed, and a third species of milkweed called swamp milkweed with both an eastern tiger swallowtail and a bumblebee, which are important pollinators for this prairie habitat. SMLC will continue to manage this project during the maintenance phase going forward. Some of the things that we'll need to manage include invasive species such as black swallowwort. Swallowwort is an invasive that has taken over some sections of the prairie runway. It forms dense areas of vegetation that prevent anything else from growing. And in 2019, we received a grant from the Oakland County Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, or a CISMA, that paid for contractors to come and professionally treat this infestation. The treatment was very successful, and it reduced the amount of swallowwort to the point where in 2020, we were able to treat all of it in the prairie using staff and volunteers. We'll also need to periodically treat the woody resprouts, and because prairie and savanna habitats evolved in conjunction with fire and grazing, we'll need to mimic these types of disturbances in order to benefit the native species. To measure our success, we've also started bird and plant surveys. And this year, the Oakland County Audubon conducted a bird survey, and we hope over time the amount of grassland and savanna birds increases as their habitat improves. Ideally, we'd like to build off of this success and expand our 15 acres into an even larger complex of prairie and oak savanna. Our third stop on this hike is the overlook for Slack Lake. As I mentioned earlier, Slack Lake is a 52-acre lake, so it's really, really huge. There's actually a whole complex of many lakes and wetlands that make up that center portion of the preserve. These are called Kettle lakes, and they were created as a result of glaciers. And how Kettle Lakes form is at the end of the last ice age, when the glaciers began to recede, a block of ice would break off and just kind of sit there. As the glacier continues to melt, it's depositing what's called outwash, which is just soil and rocks and gravel, and that's filling in around the blocks of ice. Then in step 3, when those blocks of ice finally melt, they leave these holes, and each one of these holes, or kettle basins, fills with water and becomes the lake as we know it. Slack Lake is one of the main features of the property that we wanted to protect. It appears to have good water quality. It's mostly undeveloped on all sides, and there's only 4 neighboring homes. The locals report that there is high quality fishing, although no fishing is allowed from SMLC preserves. According to the previous landowner, it has no invasive species issues and has never been dredged. It is also home to both a great blue heron rookery and a sandhill crane nesting area. Inland lakes constitute one of our greatest natural resources. Unfortunately, as a result of population growth and intensified use of surface waters and other human pressures, inland lakes are being threatened. Some of the common problems as a result of human activities include declining water quality, nuisance algal blooms, shoreline erosion, and impaired scenic qualities, all of which can lead to decreasing conservation value as well as decreasing property values. According to the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association, there are over 62,000 inland lakes in Michigan, which makes up 1.3% of the total area. 11,000 of these inland lakes are 5 acres or more, and we even have 10 lakes that are over 10,000 acres. One question I often get is, does Slack Lake freeze? So I figured instead of just giving you a one-word answer, I'd show a little video of that. All right, so we will now turn south and head away from the lake and into the mature forest. We call this area second growth or mature forest to distinguish it from the young forest we were in earlier. However, it is second growth, which means that it was previously logged, and most of these are trees that have come back since then. The 2 main forested habitats at Lost Lake are dry mesic southern forest and mesic southern forest. And these are also known as oak hickory and beech maple forest. This is the dry mesic southern forest found on higher elevations and ridges. The dominant species include oaks and hickories. These are hickories in the photo, which turn orange in the fall. There's also red maples, black cherry, and witch hazel. The mesic southern forest or beech maple is found on lower slopes and around depressions. It's dominated by sugar and red maple, basswood, red oak, and black cherry. I highly recommend this path through the mature forest. Anytime from September through October, the diversity of trees means there's different fall color displays at different times throughout the season. So you could go and it'll look completely different a week later. Our next stop is a wetland complex near the trail. I'm going to speak more broadly about wetlands because one of the really unique factors about this preserve is the diversity of wetlands. One tool that is really nifty for learning about the wetlands on the preserve or really anywhere is the National Wetlands Inventory online wetlands mapper. You can see here, you click on the wetlands mapper. I'm not going to show you how to do it, but if you want to play with it, the address is at the bottom there. So basically you can search for an address like Evans Road in Holly Township, and then you can see the various wetlands that have been mapped. So this is just one example using the National Wetlands Mapper and zooming in to Lost Lake Nature Preserve, we click on this wetland and it gives us a code, which is a federal classification for the type of wetland. It also gives you the size and the type of wetland. So a 15.99 acre freshwater forested shrub wetland. And then you can get more information from this mapper. One thing to note is that according to the national mapper, this little area outlined in yellow is classified as just one single type of wetland. That's because these maps are created from satellite images and not from being on the ground. So they're kind of broad. And in this case, they're using color imagery from 2005 to define the wetland. However, if we turn off that green blob and we just look at the aerial photo, we can tell that not everything within that area is the same. And I can tell you from actually exploring this area that there are several different types of wetland communities within that area. So when I'm out in the field, I like to use a Michigan specific guide to tell me what I'm looking at. We have a classification system specifically for the state of Michigan called the natural communities. And these definitions are established by ecologists from the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, or MNFI. They set standard descriptions for each type of habitat found in Michigan, including dozens of types of wetlands. And I highly recommend this book, The Field Guide to the Natural Communities of Michigan, as a way to get familiar with them. It's a pretty small, I have mine right here with lots of Post-its in it. So you can bring it out in the field. It's got maps of where all these are located. It has color photos and lists of indicator plants. And all of this information is also available online, as well as a key that can help you narrow down which community you're looking at. So using this guide in that little area, I have been able to find 7 types of wetlands at Lost Lake, and I'm sure there's more. I've listed them roughly in order of deep water to shallow water, or smaller plants to bigger plants. And I'm going to go through each one of these and give you guys a brief description and some photos. So closest to the lake, we have the Submergent Marsh, which is deep to shallow water. These communities have so much water that they're impacted by flooding, waves, and currents, and they contain both submergent and floating leaf plants. And the difference being that submergent plants do not quite reach above the water, like pond weeds, and floating leaf plants, as the name implies, float on the surface of the water, like pond lilies. Emergent marshes are also found along lakes and streams where it's a little bit shallower. And so they're called this because they have plants that emerge above the surface of the water, like cattails, bulrushes, and arrowheads. Next, we have the Southern Wet Meadow. This is an open wetland dominated by tussock sedge, which forms these large hummocks or mounds and makes it very tricky to walk through. Some of the common wildflowers or forbs here include Joe Pye weed, boneset, and swamp milkweed. And some of you might be familiar with these. They make great rain garden plants. The Southern Wet Meadow is also home to muskrats, sandhill cranes, and marsh wrens. Prairie Fens are a very complex community. They occur where cold calcareous groundwater flows through the soil and actually reaches the surface. And because the soils remain saturated throughout the year, the bacteria that normally break down organic matter are much reduced. And so you get this buildup of decayed plant material, or peat. And in some locations at Lost Lake, the large amount of water underneath the Prairie Fen creates this quaking floating mat, which shakes and reverberates with each step. Some of the plants that are typical of a prairie fen include shrubby cinquefoil and poison sumac. And poison sumac, it's very beautiful in the fall, but it does contain the same urushiol compounds as in poison ivy. So be careful if you see it. You don't want to touch it if you are allergic to poison ivy. You'll probably be allergic to poison sumac as well. A good example of a large prairie fen that you can visit nearby is the Nature Conservancy's Ives Road Fen. This is pictured here, and it's located in Tecumseh. The southern shrub carr, as the name implies, it's a wetland with shrubs, and it's kind of the transition zone between the open water wetlands and our forested wetlands. And you'll find a lot of different types of shrubs in here. One of my favorites is the swamp rose. It's really beautiful. A lot of these shrubs also are fruiting, so you'll find a diversity of songbirds like this common yellowthroat. Similar to the shrub carr is the inundated shrub swamp. The main difference is that it's dominated by buttonbush, which is a really fun looking plant. And it's probably the easiest natural community to recognize. So if you're looking at more than 50% of the swamp is buttonbush, then you're in an inundated shrub swamp. At the edge of the wetlands, as we go up a little bit, there are these forested wetlands, and these are generally called southern hardwood swamp. Some people have negative associations with the word swamp, but it just means a forested wetland. So I encourage all of you to embrace the swamp. I even like to use the word swamping to describe my wandering around in these areas, and it's one of my favorite activities to do at work. Typical species in the southern hardwood swamp are deciduous trees listed here, but note that many of these swamps historically had a large canopy component of ash and elm trees, which have largely been killed by emerald ash borer and Dutch elm disease. So these areas actually don't tend to have mature living elm and ash trees. They'll usually have a lot of either standing dead trees, also known as snags, or a lot of fallen dead trees like you can see in the photo here. Some of the non-tree plants you can find in a swamp are ferns. I'm just learning to identify ferns, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe these are sensitive fern, interrupted fern, and cinnamon fern. And when I was out at Lost Lake a couple weeks ago, I think I saw two other ferns that I could not identify. I also saw lots of this plant, which is called bidens, and it's also known as swamp marigold. So I also want to talk quickly about vernal pools, which are a special type of wetland. The Michigan Vernal Pools Partnership defines these as naturally occurring, small, temporarily flooded wetlands found in depressions, primarily in forest settings. They have no continuous inlet, outlet, or surface water connection. They might be surrounded by uplands, or they might be connected to other wetlands as part of a larger wetland complex. In most years, vernal pools are filled up with water in the spring, and then they dry up or significantly draw down by summer or early fall. Because they dry out regularly, there's no permanent fish populations, and so they're important habitat for wildlife such as amphibian and invertebrate species, because they can lay eggs without the risk of fish coming along and eating them. So the blue spotted salamander is one really, really adorable species that depends on vernal pools for breeding. Also, wood frogs are another vernal pool obligate. Unfortunately, vernal pools are often not protected under our current wetland laws. So many conservation organizations and private landowners are trying to locate, map, and monitor the vernal pools on their property in order to keep them healthy and protected. If you want to learn more about vernal pools, the partnership's annual meeting is coming up on December 3rd. Okay, so pop quiz. What type of wetland is this? Well, this is actually a trick question, and this photo is meant to illustrate how these wetlands interconnect with each other. There's not just a straight line around one type and you get into the next type. As you can see here, we have everything from open water to mature trees. This photo was taken roughly within that area in the blue oval on the map. And we see several types of wetlands. We have emergent marsh in the middle with the open water and the duckweed. There's a couple of pockets of inundated shrub swamp that are filled with button bush. It's also surrounded by some scattered southern shrub carr and some sunny areas of southern wet meadow. And then our forested areas in the background are southern hardwood swamp. And it's also likely that there are vernal pools connected as well. This is another photo that shows just how many types of habitat are present in a small wetland area. And as you can imagine, this leads to really high biodiversity. This is another reason why wetlands are so important to protect and are one of the highlights of Lost Lake Nature Preserve. And with that, I will wrap up our hike. Thank you all for coming, and I encourage you to get out to Lost Lake or any of our nature preserves and see it for yourself. And quickly, I just want to thank our project partners. This is a large preserve. We've done some really cool restoration projects, and we couldn't do any of it without our partners. So thank you, partners. And we've got about 13 minutes left, so I'd be happy to take questions with the remainder of the time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you can unmute yourselves if you want, or type